The John Oxley was built for two specific purposes. She serviced all the channel markers on the entire Queensland coast. She also acted as relief pilot vessel when the regular ship, the Matthew Flinders, was out of service. She carried up to 12 pilots and cruised the waters of Moreton Bay, meeting ingoing and outgoing ships.
Yeah, well, the port of Brisbane was miles up the river, up the Brisbane River. So it was pointless to have a pilot boat up there when the ships are coming in out here. So we used to go out, once again from memory, I think 3 weeks we would be on station. If the weather was moderate or calm weather, we might anchor in under the lee of Cape Morton. Also, if it was a strong southerly, you had a nice lee under Cape Morton in the bay. You could anchor there. At the month of March, which up north, of course, is the tail end of the cyclone season. So you couldn't anchor in the southern part of the bay with a northeaster or easterly gale coming in. So you just had to steam to and fro across the bay, or just put a head into it and just virtually lie hove to.
Slung on davits, forward of the lifeboat, is a boat called a whaler. Its purpose was to transport the pilots between the John Oxley and the ships entering and leaving the port of Brisbane. The whaler was powered by 4 oarsmen and steered by a sweep. In 1950, Ron Teeley was number 3 oarsman.
The hairiest part of it, I suppose, was actually coming back alongside the John Oxley, hooking to the boat falls and getting the boat up out of the water. That was, I suppose, I was going to say the scariest experience, but scared is not the word, because if you're doing it all the time, you can't stay scared. You know, you're not scared, but you're conscious of just how dangerous it is.
Did you remain in the boat while they hauled it on board?
No. 2 remained in the boat, one either end. There was a real drill attached to this. It's so many years ago. A lot of years ago. But once we got alongside, one of the main reasons for one of the ABs or one of the sailors remaining on board was he was there to make sure that you could get the falls as you come back alongside, and his job then was when you hooked the fall on, he would run up the slack, the bloke that was left on deck, and then take a turn around the cleat on the davit. So usually it was the forward fall was done first, because the John Oxley would still be moving ahead. You didn't pick up the after end first, because it would have swung the whaleboat around. So you took the weight on the forward fall. And then you took the weight on the after fall. But, you know, all the time the whaleboat can be doing
bouncing,
this.
Bouncing.
Up and down. You know, the John Oxley can be rolling. The whaleboat can be lifting. So as soon as we got alongside, number 2 and number 3 oar and the whaleboat would grab, we had man ropes down from the span between the davits. There were man ropes hanging down. And we would, each one of us would grab one of these, form up and swing aboard, so that we could give the man on deck. So you climbed the rope,
not the ladder?
No, just climbed the rope and swung inboard. And then we could give a hand then to keep the weight on the falls until we got actually up out of the water. And then those 2 that were still in the boat would come back aboard. And then we had to run her up as far as the griping spar. You know what the griping spar is?
No.
Well, there's not one there now. But when the davits are swung outboard to raise and lower the boat, below the curve of the davit, a long wooden spar is set up, 4 and a half, with nice big puddings around it, so that, you know, so the boat can come up against it without being wood to wood. And then there were gripes which went from, these are like wires, from the heads of the davits over completely around the boat, and back onto the boat deck, and we would set them up with a cable to keep the boat up against the griping spar. So that was really the drill. We would never swing them right inboard each time because it was, you know.
So you keep them out ready for
when we would go down the bay from the actual port of Brisbane, we would swing the boats out, set them up against the spars, and that's where they would stay then until we went back up the river again.
Yeah. The John Oxley is the next restoration project for the Sydney Maritime Museum. Built in Scotland in 1927 for the Queensland Port Authority, she acted as a relief pilot vessel for the Port of Brisbane, and when not required for pilot duty, serviced the navigation markers for the entire Queensland coast. When viewed from a distance, her condition looks good, but closer inspection reveals severe rusting, which in a number of places has completely penetrated the plates of the hull. However, she remains afloat, but the hull below the waterline must be in very fragile condition. A good proportion of the structural frame of the ship is sound, but rust has caused significant damage to the ribs in the cargo hold. The ship is a unique surviving example of its era. During her lifetime, little modification was made to her layout or equipment. The only major change took place after the Second World War, when the boilers were converted from coal fire to oil. While the ship has been laid up, the volunteers of the Sydney Maritime Museum have maintained the engines, and they show no sign of the dreaded rust. It is evident that one day live steam will bring them to life to once again drive this ship. The stove in the galley could easily be fired up to produce meals again, but the seaman's accommodation and amenities falls well below today's standards. It was such men as these that built the John Oxley so many years ago. The shipyard and the men have gone, but the John Oxley survives. "70 years after this photograph was taken, the volunteers of the Sydney Maritime Museum are about to begin the task of restoring this vessel to seagoing condition. The John Oxley is about to be raised out of the water on a pontoon to allow the repairs to the hull to be carried out. The pontoon was built by the Citra Company in the mid-1980s for the restoration of the James Craig's hull. Constructed on dry land on a slipway, it was launched like a conventional ship. Once in the water, it was towed to the Sydney Maritime Museum workshops at Rozelle, where it was prepared to receive the James Craig. The tugs then took it to Cockatoo Island, where it was floated into the dry dock, the dock gates closed and water removed, allowing the pontoon to settle on the bottom. The dock is filled again. Hatches on top of the pontoon have been opened, and it also fills with water and remains submerged. The water in the dock is allowed to reach the same level as the harbour outside, and then the dock gates are removed. The James Craig is now brought to the dock entrance and guided into the dock. She is centred over the pontoon, and then the dock gates are put back in place. Timber struts are placed between the dock side and the ship to keep her in the correct location. Once the timbers are in place, the pumps are started and the ship's hull will be exposed for the first time in years. Now the hull is high and dry, the marine growth has to be removed to expose the old steel plates. The valves are opened and the water is allowed to enter the dock. The pontoon has been drained and the hatches bolted down. The James Craig is now high and dry on its new floating dock and is about to enter the harbour on its journey back to Rozelle. The Glebe Island Bridge is open. The James Craig and her pontoon are carefully squeezed through with barely enough room and leave behind them a massive traffic jam on each side of the bridge. James Craig is now back at its wharf alongside the workshops in Roselle. The officials of the Sydney Maritime Museum now have a chance to examine the condition of the plates of the hull. Most of these plates had to be removed because they were in very, very poor condition. The hull had been filled with concrete to stabilize it and to prevent it from leaking, and now that concrete had to be removed. In late 1996, the repairs to the hull are almost complete. In February 1997, she is taken down Sydney Harbour to Garden Island, where she will be floated off her pontoon. On one of those days when Sydney Harbour sparkles, we all wait for the James Craig to leave the Garden Island dockyard. At 70 years old, the plates of the John Oxley are showing their age. We can see right through them into the ship from the outside. Daylight streams in on the inside. The hull was patched 10 years ago, but flakes of rust fall off everywhere. The plates at the waterline look very delicate. It is in this condition she will make the 5-kilometre voyage from Roselle to Garden Island. The original 1927 drawings were used to set the keel blocks to the shape of the John Oxley's hull. Early in the morning of March the 3rd, 1997, pumps are in place, ready to deal with any leaks that might develop on the voyage. Life jackets are on board, just in case. The skipper, Jeff Atherton, and the pilot discuss details of the ship's dimensions and displacement. The tugs arrive promptly at 8:45. The pilot advises the tug skipper to treat us gently as our hull is in delicate condition. He warns us that the pumps could handle a small leak, but if we lose a plate, we should prepare to leave the ship. We are now underway and the crew go below to check that we remain watertight. Not much clearance for the mast under the new bridge, but plenty of room through the old bridge. As we approach the harbour bridge, there are no signs of problems with our rusted plates. The workmanship of the Scottish shipbuilders and the museum volunteers have kept this ship afloat long after all its contemporaries have disappeared. We are swung around by the tugs so that we can enter the dry dock stern first. Divers make the necessary adjustments to ensure that the delicate hull is sitting correctly on the keel blocks. Time to relax while the dock pumps remove the water to expose the hull. Ten years of marine growth has helped to preserve the submerged plates. On the 6th of March 1997, we prepare to leave the dock. A tight squeeze for the pontoon through the old Glebe Island Bridge. Now safely tied up at Roselle, the real work is yet to be done.